Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest, Todd Huber. Met him recently when I was speaking at his parish in St. Petersburg. He had taken my son Christopher under his wing over a year ago and mentored Chris in his year there in the St. Pete parish of St. Raphael's, and I thank him for that. Um, Todd is father to four beautiful children. He's married to his wife, Marcy, who serves with the Air Force. Todd has an interesting history. He graduated from the Naval Academy and Stanford as an aerospace engineer. So that gives you an idea of his IQ status. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he's doing and how he got changed in tracks and gears here. He was an FA-18 strike fighter pilot and test pilot in the Navy for over 20 years. He retired in 2018. Shifted gears. He started a nonprofit called Cattellyst, and we're going to talk about that today. It's an incredible story. The great work he's doing in remote areas of India, in impoverished areas that have had this situation for years and years. Todd's going to talk to us about his brief encounter with Mother Teresa and how that impacted his life. But very exciting to meet such a wonderful Catholic. I met his wife as well, just beautiful people, and they're living the gospel and spreading the mercy of God. So, Todd, welcome to Mercy Unbound.
Thanks, Dr. Thatcher. I'm happy to be here.
You know, you had an extensive military background. You studied for years, and how in the world, what changed, or what got you desiring and needing in your heart to start and found Cattellyst?
Yeah, like how's a Navy fighter pilot end up in remote villages on the border with Bangladesh? I ask that question myself often, and my answer is comes back to faith. I think in this deep abiding love for Christ. You mentioned the experience with Mother Teresa. That happened. I was blessed for that experience to happen very early. As a young adult, I was in flight school in Pensacola, and had read a book called A Simple Path, and I was so inspired by the way that Mother Teresa and the missionaries of charity were taking what their faith is and then applying that to how they live. That I essentially wrote a thank you letter. It wasn't specifically to Mother Teresa; it was to the missionaries of charity. And back then, the only address I could find was a Calcutta address. So I wrote the letter, sent it away, and then got back to the business of flight school for the Navy. About 2 to 3 months later, I then got a letter in the mail, and it was from Mother Teresa. And in classic Mother Teresa fashion, she said this more tactfully, but essentially it said, if you like it so much, then do something about it. So, put up or shut up, pal. And, included and sort of embedded in that as an invitation. So you're welcome to come share in our works for the poor. Um, I couldn't imagine at that point saying no or picking some other thing to do with my time. So I did find an opportunity then in flight school to go over to India, met Mother Teresa, went to mass with her every day, and then worked in the different homes in adoration at night. We didn't, I say this often, we didn't braid each other's hair. She saw a lot of people. There were a lot of volunteers that would go over there back there into that time. But it was very impactful to me, kind of the whole rest of my life. So, I sought ways to live the gospel and um, to apply my faith to the way that I was living my life throughout my whole career in the Navy, and where there was opportunities for leave or trips or adventures, things. So I sought opportunities to do that again, volunteering or serving people in remote communities. And then I was doing an MBA program up at MIT just before I got out, and a classmate there had asked me to start a nonprofit with him. So that nonprofit was called Broken Crayons. And we did that, and we wanted to focus on children lived in extreme poverty communities. And we did this thing at MIT's famous for this, looking at really complex systems, and applying some techniques called system dynamics to try to help pull it apart, at least figure out how to look at something and how to manage that human reaction to just being overwhelmed with where do you even start. And what came out of that was our desire to serve the kids by serving the moms. And our sort of theory of change was around not just trying to solve one problem or pick what's the hardest problem to solve, let's just solve that one, but recognizing and seeing a lot of examples where doing that allows some other challenge is so powerful, and if you don't confront that one also, then it can erode any progress that you make in the others. So for example, you could put the best school on the planet Earth in a community. I mean, the best teachers, the best facilities, the absolute best academic program with students with a passionate desire to learn. But if they show up and they're starving and they're hungry, then they're not going to learn. You can start a business with a single mom, and but if she doesn't have any health care and she gets malaria, the business is going to have to close down for a long period of time, and she probably doesn't have the resources at that point to absorb that shock. So we applied that with Broken Crayons in Ghana. We had a co-founder who was from Ghana and lived in Ghana, so we were going in Accra, Ghana, and it was shockingly successful. So it was just over the course of 1 year, we started with a group of 10 women. At the end of the year, they had a strong social network. They had a business mentor. They had a brick and mortar business, actually like a roadside stall. They all chose the businesses. They all chose the locations. They had healthcare. They had savings accounts. Like they had all these things. And the big thing for me is they had each other. And the other part of that that's not kind of written into the model is that our orientation, our mindset was the mindset that I learned from Mother Teresa, which is this extreme reverence for those who live in financially poor communities. They are extremely strong people who confront challenges every day. In a lot of cases, without even thinking about it, it's a way of life. They're just getting it done. So approaching these communities and recognizing, I'm an outsider. I'm a straight white American man walking around the streets of the slums of Accra, and earning that right to be there, recognizing the privilege of being invited into someone's home in that community, and then learning from them, asking a lot of questions, recognizing I probably am showing up with solutions in my mind that aren't the right solution. And I probably don't even really understand the real problems that they're experiencing. So investing that time and effort to learn from them. And then the end focus, I think a big part of the beginning part is the orientation, the mindset is about learning, and approaching it from a place of deep respect for those communities. The execution part is about try to solve all the problems at once, and do that with partners who know what they're doing. So, Cattellyst, and in this case, Broken Crayons, we're not educators. So, you want to partner with somebody who's an educator when you're doing education, but bringing all those pieces together. And then at the end, the goal, the objective is for them to thrive on their own, to not need us. And then if we're going to stay, or we want to stay, we got to continue to earn your place there. But if we go away, we don't want them dependent on us, to have to show back up, so that if we leave, then kind of everything sort of crumbles down.
Right.
So anyway, so with Broken Crayons in Ghana, at the end of a year, we had 9 of the 10 women had businesses, and it only, the amount of money, if we divvied it all up, that we'd spent was really a little over $1,000 a family. including building a brick and mortar store, right? These little roadside stalls only cost about $500. So that inspired me to say, well, I'm really interested in a community level. This was a family level thing. Is there a way for us to try to address the whole community? So that's what Cattellyst is. So Cattellyst is that distinction, I think, from what we were doing at Broken Crayons. So my wife and I founded Cattellyst on my son's birthday in May of 2017. And then when I retired in 2018, we started working this Cattellyst. Had invested a lot of time in communities my wife got into grad school at University of Michigan for public policy. So that's where we went to when I first retired, was Ann Arbor. So we were spending time in Detroit. My mom was from Detroit, and lots of ties to Detroit. So we had spent time, and then right as we were getting ready to do some of these projects, the COVID hit. Right. So South Africa, Detroit, all that, everything just really went to lockdown. But I had maintained this. I kept going back to Calcutta. I had kept going back to India. I still had a lot of relationships there. And while I was at MIT, the business school functions like the final project. Like you're at the end of the program. Here's your big project, and you're going to get partnered up with some global firm. All the projects have to be international. You're going to go overseas. And my year, they gave us an option of when they're matching you to a company, do you want there to be kind of a social benefit or a social impact of some kind? And I said, absolutely, I'd love to be a company or work with a company. And in such a kind hand of Providence, I get paired up with innovative small healthcare firm based in Calcutta. So, all right, we're going back to Calcutta and bringing my classmates. We're going to spend a few extra days while we're there. But the CEO of that company is an Ashoka Fellow, which is a kind of a big deal in the social entrepreneurship space. He and I have gotten to be very good friends. And even when COVID hit, then we had this conversation about, is there a way for us to at least start making headway in relationships with communities, especially during COVID. And so that's what brought us to India. So now we have 2 ongoing projects in India. We're in a conversation for a third. One's rural, one's urban. So it's about us trying to learn as much as we can.
Before we get into those, I looked at your website, and I want you to tell the audience what is the website address.
So it's www.cattellyst.org, and Cattellyst is spelled strangely. So it's Cattellyst, and Cattellyst is spelled that way because my grandfather, my mom's dad, his last name was Cattell, so it's named in honor of my grandpa.
Well, that brings the next question, because on your website you mentioned Dr. Charles Cattell. Is that who we're talking about, and what role did he play in all this?
It is just sort of a lifelong mentor. I was very close. I was blessed to have a strong relationship with both sets of grandparents for a long time in my life. They both sets have passed on now. I was particularly close with my grandpa, Pop Cattell, so I would call him. So he, along the lines of the communities we're looking at and that we're asking to partner with, that we want to learn about, that we're inspired by. He grew up very poor in southwestern Michigan, in a rural community on a farm. He was very smart. He graduated high school at 16, went to college. Then it was a state teachers college. Now it's Western Michigan University, and got his degree in education in a couple years. Came back and then was teaching in his hometown in a one-room schoolhouse. So he had his siblings and everybody else from his kind of village in the school. And then his dad died. So they already were struggling financially to make ends meet. And his mom, my great grandma, looked at him and said, "We're not going to be able to get by with you as a teacher." And she knew he wasn't cut out to be a farmer. She said, "You're crazy smart. You're going to apply for med school." So under orders of his mom, he applied to both medical school and dental school at the University of Michigan and got into both. And dental school was shorter, so so he picked dental school. My great grandma packed up everything, sold everything, and she became a fraternity house mother in order to pay for him to get through dental school at the University of Michigan. So my grandpa again grew up under those circumstances, but then ended up after dental school, went to World War II, and he was all across. It was the great adventure of his life. He served in MASH units all across Northern Africa, and then up into Italy, and all through Italy, and then finished up living in Paris. He was in France for a while before he then came home and set up a private practice in Detroit with my grandma. Got married. He also, they struggled with children. My grandmother had her first child was stillborn, and her second child was spina bifida. And back then, again, not a lot of options. And the child died after a couple days. So they ended up looking to adopt, and eventually adopted my mom from a back then they had this it's called the Florence Christendom Home for Unwed Mothers. They had the whole system of them across the country. So my mother was in an orphanage there at about 6 months old, and they adopted her. So there's a lot of ties to these different challenges that my grandpa had to confront. He was always really inspired by technology and by people. This sense you'll see in a lot of the sort of the tagline, this culture and value of that Cattellyst has adopted, of the greatness of people. And I really attribute that to kind of the reverence that my grandfather had for other people that had to confront challenges, and that I really had for my grandfather in the manner that he lived his life, and my grandmother for that matter too. But he didn't have any sons. And his siblings, he had a sister, and then a stepbrother. The stepbrother never got married, and sister changed her name, so his name sort of passed on with him. And so it was important to me to capture that name and put it in the nonprofit.
It was interesting when I was looking at your website, you talked about basically strategic planning and sorting out all these problems, because that's kind of a lot. It brought back some memories of when I was in Africa of, they built a little mud school, but they didn't have paper. They didn't have desks. The weekend I got there, a little infant had died of malaria, and they were bearing a child. They didn't have fresh water. And they didn't have electricity. And you look at all these things and go, where do you start? And, people much smarter than myself and put together, that's helping you, I suspect, look at this and say, how do we accomplish these goals? You mentioned you got several projects going on, different areas. Can you share with us? Let's just start with the one maybe in the rural, or what are you doing over there now?
Sure, and I'll if I could address a little bit of that complexity and how it's super easy to get overwhelmed very quickly. And I'll say, for anybody that if God puts on your heart a desire to serve others, and he does that, I think, at some level for all of us. I think it's a part of that, a part of our nature. It's certainly a part of Christ's command to us. And that when you're in that moment of what do I do, there's a couple things that seem to be common mechanisms for the enemy, if you will, to help discourage us. And one is that complexity. It's like, well, I'll not have any impact. Mother Teresa, Teresa of Lisieux, and there's a lot of great saints who have embodied a great counter to that, and that is, don't worry about the big thing. Just do something very small with great love. So start small and just pour yourself really into that one person on the street, in Mother Teresa's case, right? The other one, though, is that there's kind of a running theme right now that is accurate, which is that the people that understand the problem best are those closest to the problem, and in a lot of cases, very well-intentioned folks have gone abroad, right, and shown up. And I'm not going to judge them in any way, and I'm not going to broadly apply that. But there are individual cases and examples where perhaps through a little bit of a mindset of pity and a little bit of showing up and thinking, I've got these answers and I want to bestow these answers on someone, even in the best case scenario, without investing that time in a trusted relationship to really understand what the problem is from the people who are experiencing the problem, it can go badly and actually cause harm. So so how we get started is to try to counter that and spend time with that, with the community and listening to the community. And then we do apply, in that extremely complex scenarios, we apply a framework that we developed. There's a lot of research that it's based on. It aligns pretty well. You're a doctor. It aligns pretty well with the social determinants of health. There's a lot of different frameworks that show those. If you look at all these different categories, can you just kind of group them in and say, we're going to apply each one of these lenses to that community. We're going to ask questions about each of these. For us, it's 6 areas. And if we don't address all 6 areas, the main driver in each of the 6 areas, then any one of those, again, is going to be powerful enough to erode any progress we make in the others. Those 6 are economics, education, ecology, healthcare, community, and governance. So the first project we have is in a region. It's the world's largest mangrove forest. It's on the big, huge river delta on the border between India and Bangladesh. It's called the Sundarbans. It's the world's last best refuge for the Bengal tiger. It's got a rich, deep cultural history that goes back. They can trace back in folklore almost 2,000 years. There's like 4.5 million people out there. They have all kinds of problems and all kinds of challenges. So we said, let's pick one island, one village. So the island of Kumimuri has 22,000 people in it, no doctors. Right, the sea level rise that's coming from temperature increase in the world is causing salinity to work its way into the soil. So it's either in in the well water that ends up with high salt content over the summer months, or they just had another cyclone come through. So I think that makes like 5 cyclones in the last 3 years or so, something like that. They've got earthen levees that often give way. So there's a lot of flooding that comes out. When that flooding comes in, it's just brackish water, then also poisons the soil. So they're not earning their livelihood. The men are looking, where am I going to get work to provide for my family? Those who stay will go into the forest looking for honey. The Sundarbans honey is very prized honey, and that's where they confront the Bengal tigers. They also will go fishing, and when they're fishing along the shoreline, they're harvesting crabs. They're also confronting the tigers then. Just a reminder too that tigers swim, particularly these Sundarbans tigers are famous for swimming long distances. So you never know where the tiger's going to be. And there's a lot of them. So a lot of the men leave. So this is an official survey, but our estimate right now is upwards of 70% of the men, working age men, have left as urban migrants into the cities looking for work. And there's no shortage of industries that are there to exploit them. Actually, they face a whole new set of hardships and challenges, and they're away from their families. So then you have young, uneducated women who are left alone in the communities, which then becomes a target for sex trafficking, human trafficking efforts, right? So there's a lot of that's happening. People are then going in there to try to exploit the vulnerability of those women. So again, it can be overwhelmed quickly. For us, as we step through each of those domains, I'll say we started by hiring women from the villages, and now a few men, as story collectors. We had relationships with a few people out there. So it's a trusted relationships with, with people who have lived there, who are from there, who understand the culture. And then we asked them, can we can we meet and hire some women to just tell their own story? Sorry, excuse me. So it's their own, sort of a subdialect of Bengali, so it's even their own language. But the stories that they tell each other when they're speaking to each other have a fundamentally different texture to them. Giving voice to that life experience is a very powerful thing. We we had partnered with a documentary filmmaker who had been going out to the Sundance for a couple of years. And the first week, the stories that started coming in, she said, I've never heard any of these stories, right? And particularly as an outsider, when you come in, it even changes sort of that power dynamic, right? That the way they're telling the story when you're telling it to an outsider versus you're telling it to a close friend is all different. So yeah, we've collected almost 800 stories now, listening to that kind of pull apart, and it completely changed our mindset of the things that we thought they would need, the things we thought that would have impact. So in economics, that's not the case. In economics, it confirmed it, and that's that the farming, right, the agricultural situation needs change to provide them, an earning opportunity at home so that the men can stay. But what we learned is, our assumption of how much that would take, a living wage, like a wage that they would, that men would be allowed to live a comfortable life in a traditional setting out on those islands, is less than $200 a month. Right? That's what they're going 1,000 miles to work in mines on the other side of the country to earn a couple $100 a month versus staying home, right, with their families. So so trying to find a way. So we have partnered with a company who's got who has some innovative agricultural ways, and say, is this, did we hear this right? Is this going to be a good fit? And we're going to run a pilot on that. Education, we're going to do. Go ahead.
What are you growing when you say agriculture? What?
Rice is the dominant crop, and some of the experimenting we're going to do with them, the indigenous rice varieties that they grew up until, we think, around the 1950s or so, were much more salt tolerant. And then they shifted because they get a better price for the rice that they're growing now, as it was easier to export. It was, people like that rice better. But that rice is not, again, it needs what they call sweet water. So they need fresh water for that rice. So the dominant crop is rice. So part of the conversation is there's some organizations in India that have curated and cultivated this indigenous rice variety that is still salt tolerant, and can they reteach them, relearn the practices of how to grow that?
That's interesting. Tell us like the medical situation there. Well, before we get there, Todd, I want to say you have a beautiful 3-minute video on your website at Cattellyst.org. We're going to try and play that now. And then I'll come back to you with a question.
At Cattellyst, one of our core beliefs is in the greatness of people. We believe that greatness is amplified when it confronts great challenges, like those here on the island of Kumimari, with 22,000 people and no doctors. People here also have no content online that's sourced specifically for them. There's no journalism, there's no TV channels, there's no content that gives voice to their life experience. The historic livelihood on this island has been in farming. But with rising sea levels and a cyclone that now comes every year that floods out the island, the soil is increasingly becoming poisoned with salinity.
যেমন জায়গায় থাকি আয়লাতে আমাদের সব কিছু ভাসিয়ে নিয়ে গেছে। এখন একটা বড় কিছু হলে আমাদের মরা ছাড়া কোনো উপায় নেই, আরে যেতে যেতেই আমাদের মরা শেষ হয়ে যাবে। কোনো কিছু হলে এখান থেকে 3 ঘন্টা রাস্তা কলকাতায় যেতে হবে।
At Cattellyst, our focus is to be a platform that connects communities like Kumi Marie to technologies and services that enable them to thrive. We're doing that here, for sure, with healthcare, with a partner in iCure TechSoft, who shares our vision and commitment to empowering people by sourcing community health workers from the villages, people who have been born and raised here, that understand the culture, that respect the dignity of the community. We also partner with a media company, Recanter, that looks to change that dynamic. Instead of coming in, sourcing the stories from outsiders, allow the people to tell their own story.
তো সুন্দরবনের ভিতরে অনেকই ঘটনা থাকে যেগুলো মধু ভাঙা, জঙ্গলে কাঠ কাটা, মাছ ধরতে যাওয়া। আমার যেন ভালো লাগবে যে হ্যাঁ, আমাদের সুন্দরবনের মানুষদের কিছু গল্প আমি বাইরে পাঠাতে পেরেছি, তাদের গল্প পৃথিবীর সবাই জানতে পারছে।
By listening to those stories, we're already learning a great deal about this community. We just feel privileged to be here, to be able to serve the people, serve this community, and we're excited to see them continue to thrive for the next year and the next century beyond.
You mentioned you believe the organization in the greatness of people. Talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I think it comes back to this view of when we look at the Sundarbans, when you go to communities like in Hyderabad, we're in slum communities in the middle of the city, and 3 of those are physically built in garbage dumps. So you have shanties that parents have set up inside the garbage dump and kids run around. We're out, you mentioned the medical community, you're out in the Sundarban, and Kumi Marie, it's 22,000 people, not a single doctor. The women are giving birth without, not even a doula, right? There's not a nurse, there's no medication, they're giving birth in the home. And it's easy for us when we go into those communities to look at what we have and they lack. And when we talk about that we believe in the greatness of people, if we approach those communities looking for that greatness instead of looking for their hardship, specifically looking for how are you confronting those hardships, how do you deal with those hardships, what do you cherish in your life, who are your friends like, who do you look up to, and listen to those stories and spend time with them, there is without question so much more that comes back to us in return. It is so incredibly uplifting. And from my faith perspective, recognizing the dignity of every human being and conveying hope, conveying love, conveying respect, just by your manner of presence and being there, and it being genuine, right? They can see when it's not. So I believe fundamentally in the greatness of people, and that greatness, I think I say this in the video, but that greatness is amplified when it confronts challenges. So as a very selfish, gluttonous way on my part, I want to see that, I want to experience that, I want to learn more about that. If I get invited into a community and have the privilege to get to sit in a shanty in a garbage dump in the middle of Hyderabad and have a mom talk to me about how she cooks food to make sure her kids can eat that day, I'm not overwhelmed with pity, I'm overwhelmed with respect, I'm just so inspired, so humbled, right, in recognizing her strength and my weakness. And I come away with so much better, I think, as a person, so much closer to Christ. It doesn't make me love him more, it makes me love him more deeply, right? To apply that, his to see how the poorest of the poor live, he's in and amongst them, and in a lot of ways to recognize, and in recognizing that greatness, we also see what we're lacking. So I think I often get the question about why do you go all the way to India? Can't you do that at home? And the answer is yes. In my case, I'm called to do it abroad. There's no question about that for me, and a discernment and prayer. God wants me there, whether I like it or not. That's where it's meant to be right now, and I love it. Right, and I'm surrendered to His will in that way, and so grateful for it. So I'll say the first thing is that in a Pope's book, Dare to Dream, he has a great quote. There's a lot of great quotes in there, but there's a great quote that helped affirm perhaps what God's intention is for me. And that is that to see the world the way it really is, you have to go to the margins. You have to go to the extremes. I think you can be a great human being. You can be a great Christian, a great Catholic. You can be a great saint and not see the world as it really is. But if your calling requires you or benefits from you seeing the world as it really is, you really do need to go out abroad and see. More people in the world live like those in the slums of Hyderabad and in Sundarbans than live the way 350 million Americans do in our country. There is extreme poverty in the United States also. Native American reservations, Appalachia, like all over every city in the United States has some place that if you ask them where the poor people live, even tourists will tell you where that is. Right? There's a known geographically specific place that is challenged. So, but going abroad and seeing what this human experience is like for way more humans than the experience that I have had growing up, even in the Navy, all the places we've been. Again, we need to see that. But the other thing is I'm starting to recognize in the number of trips we've had 4 multi-week trips in the last year, and every time we come back, we're really starting to recognize in ministries back here and in conversations back here and in work we're doing back here, it's becoming less about me going over there on mission. It's about me going over there so I come back here on mission. And seeing someone might have a lot of money in their bank account, but that presents incredible, unimaginable challenges for them. And it may be alone, it may be abandoned, it may be struggling, it may have attachments that are preventing them from having a deep abiding love of Christ, or feeling hope, or feeling love, or feeling dignity. And so finding a way to bridge those two, I think long term is something we would love to be able to do.
Has your wife grown in her faith as a result of all this as well?
Yeah, we both grown, I think, as a result of this together as a couple and as a family. And before we were doing this, I'd be vulnerable and transparent. Before we started doing this work, we were going to church. We prayed at meals. We had faith. We had some level of love, I think, for Christ, certainly respect for the Father, if I had to characterize it in some way. As a family now, we pray the rosary as a family now. We're going, Marcy or I is going to daily mass. So one of the two as we kind of work through that out together. We're praying at the beginning of the day, pray at the end of the day. A lot of prayer, which is a path, has been a path for us and for a lot of others, right? On this first you have a deep relationship. It's hard to have a relationship with somebody that you don't spend time with. So spending that time in prayer has helped us develop that relationship. We did do a family consecration to Our Lady. That also has been very powerful for us as a family. So Marcy's charism, as we've worked together in discerning that, is is much more about prayer and praying for souls and praying for others, as an activity, as her work. Mother Teresa had in that letter, "Come with a heart to love, but hands to serve." And that quote has just constantly resonated throughout my whole life. It's not just come with a heart. It's not just have a heart to love, but come with a heart to love. It's show up, right? Show up for the person that's right there. Show up on the other side of the world, but show up. So come with a heart to love. Be present for others with a heart to love, but then do something about it with hands to serve. And when I say that, I envision myself with hands, like reaching out to serve with someone, to shake someone's hand, to hold them, to listen to them. In my wife's case, it's her hands go into the side of prayer, right? And praying, actively praying for someone. In fact, not today, on All Souls Day. That's she's off doing that right now for the full day.
I had the privilege of meeting her briefly, and there was a young gal with her who had some issues, and she was helping her and she exuded God's love, and that's what we're called to do. What are your projects you're just starting, or maybe hoping to get going here in the next months or year?
Yeah, so it's villages in the Sundarbans. I think we'll look to expand that. So we now have we have a mobile medical boat. It's not going between 5 islands to bring doctors out there. Hired community health workers, so 7 community health workers in the village. So they the training they get is actually more tech training. It's about teach them how to set up a laptop to be able to do telehealth, telemedicine, or to collect vitals with gear that then can Bluetooth that data back in a platform and get it all uploaded and send it back. We have story collectors that have collected all of these stories, and now we're working with a media company to say, is there a way for us to turn that around and help them share stories with each other, right? A platform that allows them to give voice to each other. Right now, there's no newspapers or local generated content that's intended for them. Even if they're online looking for something, none of it's in their voice about their story. So trying to turn that around, do that for them. We are setting up a remote education center. So we have an agreement with the community center on the island with the Grand Panchayat, sort of the mayor, to set that up so we can give tutoring for children outside of school hours and during school hours. We're looking to partner up with some companies who can do training and then potentially hire people on the island to do remote work, right? As long as we give them a good solid internet connection. And then the governance piece, there's a lot of really good health benefits. It's just about getting access to those benefits. So, just like any place else, India's got a bureaucracy associated with accessing your benefits. So having somebody that's physically located on the island, turns out there's a company in India that's doing that as a social venture. So we're partnering with them to get somebody full-time on the island that can then process your request for benefits and to get all these that are available to them in India. So that's a plan there. In Hyderabad, we're partnering with Don Bosco. It's really interesting. It's same model, same 6 areas, but we're doing a little bit different interventions, and we've structured that in a way. Don Bosco is an amazing organization with a rich history that's focused often and primarily on children, but taking in street kids. And what they're finding is in the urban migration waves that are happening right now, sort of a modern version of that, kids often are staying with the parents, but then they're all day left in the shantytown. So we created these teams with them as a pilot over the last 6 months, going into the shantytown. So bring the teacher there, bring the healthcare worker there, get a story collector there, and an ombudsman, somebody to help them get access to benefits, register them for schools, register them to take exams, or get them into skills training programs so that they have better opportunities for employment. So that's what we've been doing with them in Hyderabad.
Now, unfortunately or fortunately, all these things cost money, and you've done amazing things with little money, really, as you mentioned. But people can donate off your website, can't they?
They can.
And give people that website again, if you would, and spell it out again, Todd.
Sure. It's again, it's Cattellyst, spelled Cattellyst. So just www.cattellyst.org. We do have the ability to donate in the website, and there's also a way to contact us if somebody wants to have wants to have a conversation about a donation. We haven't done any overt fundraising campaigns. We spent a lot of time in prayer and have been blessed with God providing us with donors who have approached us in response to that prayer. But if people are called to do that, we certainly appreciate it. We will use it. We need it. Any donations that come in through the website, and we have that 100% social impact pledge. So that what we intend by that is that the money then goes directly to the project. It's not going to cover accountants or overhead or administrative. And things, the snacks we give kids in Hyderabad when they're getting a tutoring sessions, cost a few cents. As I talked about, a annual salary for a health worker costs a couple $1,000. So anything in between from a few cents to bigger numbers, right? Anything has an impact.
It all helps.
And it all helps, and we receive all of it with extreme gratitude.
And you've got a beautiful website with a lot of pictures of the land and the people and some of what you're doing. And I encourage people to visit the website and consider really seriously helping you out. Todd, any closing thoughts before we wrap up today's show of Mercy Unbound?
No, I just say I appreciate your work. I want to say thank you, right, to your work. The message of divine mercy resonates very deeply for us. It's been profound for me and my family, and it matters, right? It's that Mother Teresa statement of, what we do may only be a drop in the ocean, but if we don't do it, that drop will never be there, right? It will never happen. I'm inspired. Lately, I've picked up a book of Charles de Foucauld, one of the recent saints. He was declared a saint in May, and that mercy through his evangelization through presence, right, and just serving Christ by being present for others in the manner of living. And I hope that my life reflects that in some way. Your life certainly has, and those of the Marian Fathers as well. So please extend our thanks to them as well.
You've talked a couple of times, you mentioned about that gift of presence, and that is so important because, again, you don't have to go to India, but we're so caught up, we're so busy, we have so many things on our mind that people walk by us and we're not present to them. And that's a beautiful gift that we have to slow it down. And as you mentioned, sometimes our financial status can be a detriment, not a blessing, but almost a curse, because we're so worried about how we're managing things that we're missing the beauty of the day and just being present and a loving person to those around us. And Todd, you and your wife are certainly doing incredible stuff. It's just a joy for me to have met you and have you on today on Mercy Unbound. Keep up the great work. People, help them out. We say as Eucharistic apostles that mercy is love that seeks to lessen the misery of others. So thank you, everyone, for joining me today on Mercy Unbound. Todd, we'll hope to have you back down the road to hear what's going on with your continued projects. And thank you for joining us. And people, hope you have a wonderful day. Spread the show. Let's spread the good news of Jesus Christ, and God love all of you. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.